Hello, friends. Good afternoon. I hope you are well. My name is Christy Wells. I am the CEO of Safe House Project, and we are excited to have you on here for our 2023 landscape analysis on restorative care and what most of you are really here for, our 2023 grant details. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll just do a little bit of a quick introduction here. So like I said, my name is Christy Wells. I am the CEO and co-founder of Safe House Project. And we have on here Alia, who is our director of aftercare. So just to give you an idea of what the agenda is for this webinar, we will be doing just a quick overview on Safe House Project. I know most of you know us, but if you don't, this will give you a chance to get to know a little bit of who we are, what we do, and what our place is in this field. We'll talk about the 2023 restorative care breakdown, barriers to equitable access for care for survivors. We'll talk about our state resource guide, our 2023 SHP grant data, and provide any additional resources beyond that. Okay, so quickly, Safe House Project's mission is really focused on a few key areas. We work to increase survivor identification beyond 1% through education, provide emergency services and placements to survivors, and ensure that really at the end of the day, every survivor has access to safe housing and holistic care. We do this not on our own, but we do this by uniting communities to end domestic trafficking and restore hope, freedom, and a future to every survivor. Our core pillars are innovation, collaboration, hope, integrity, and stewardship. And collaboration, if for those of you who know us and work with us, you know that is at the heart of everything that we do. We have a ridiculous goal on our website, and it says it's to eradicate trafficking in America by 2030. And that is not a statement of what we as an organization can do on our own. That is a rally cry to all of our friends, all of our partners, and all of the communities in which we serve to step into the work to serve survivors. So we will continue. So quickly, where the areas that we focus, we work to, again, increase victim identification through education. So we have a community-based training that we've used called OnWatch, which many of you know about. We work to train healthcare professionals through our HOPE trafficking training, which was developed in partnership with the Academy of Forensic Nursing. Those are all digital solutions. We train law enforcement educators, employees, community members on really how to spot, report, and prevent trafficking. We provide emergency support to survivors as they're exiting their trafficking situation and really help get them placed into quality, safe homes like yourselves. And so we have incredible advocates on our team that we're not a referral mechanism. We are a very high touch placement agency. And so we have the opportunity to engage with so many of you to know the incredible expertise and survivor type that you serve. And we really work to marry that with the individual need of the survivor. And so when we found that when we can do that one-on-one placement, it really increases their likelihood of, or decreases their likelihood of experiencing trauma again and re-victimization. And then at the end of the day, we also are here to increase capacity. We know we have a capacity issue in this field, so we work to increase capacity through safe housing and through certification. And funding, which is, again, we know why you guys are all here, which is exciting. Since we've been serving survivors since 2017, to date, we have trained over 270,000 people on how to identify trafficking. Again, everything that we do, we completely track. So it's exciting when we get to really see those numbers increasing through, especially through some of our digital solutions. We had 125 plus survivors. Actually, I think it ended at 146 survivors served last quarter through emergency placement or emergency support and safe house placement. We have helped fund and mentor 371 new beds through new or expanding restorative care programs in the last 5 years. At the end of the day, that has provided 135,000 safe nights. And we've provided over, really at this point, about 10,000 hours worth of mentorship into the anti-trafficking field, again, to help decrease barriers, speed up timelines to opening and learning curves, et cetera. So again, if those of you who don't know, this is a great tool for you to be able to use in your communities. It's called OnWatch. It is a free 1-hour training that equips any community member on how to spot, report, and prevent trafficking where they live, work, and play. Every training that is done by Safe House Project is done with and by survivors. They share their lived experience and not the horrific things that happen behind closed doors, but they share about their intersection points with community members and what signs and indicators were present during their trafficking situations. So through On Watch, we go through a variety of different business types or business models of trafficking, help draw those out in a storytelling manner, and then have an industry expert breakdown that really can help dissect what those signs and indicators were that were present. Hopefully this can be something that serves you all to train volunteers. We know that you guys don't have time to create a million PowerPoints day in, day out. So use this as it can serve you. Again, our Hope trafficking training, this was one that we developed with a team of survivors, as well as the Academy of Forensic Nursing, to educate healthcare workers on how to identify trafficking in their community. Many of you have partnerships with incredible healthcare facilities in your area, and you probably have run into the same thing we have, where you do have a handful of people who are really well trained, and a couple of social workers and a couple of forensic nurses, and then you've got the rest of them that might not have had the opportunity to receive high quality training to understand how to identify trafficking. So this is just a resource that we provide to these healthcare networks. And it's actually one that we do monetize, and we do charge the large healthcare networks, because those are actually some of the dollars that we reinvest back out into you guys. So if you have connections into healthcare networks and you want to help us get that training into there, then again, those dollars, 100% of those dollars are reinvested to serve the field. So Brittany and I were very specific several years ago that we had absolutely no intention of stepping into the policy space. However, what we had recognized was that there was a very big gap in policy that they really weren't hearing from stakeholders across the nation and really in order to develop survivor-informed, trauma-informed policy. They weren't hearing what the survivors were really needing, and so the policies weren't being created. We were asked last year to see if we could basically rally a few friends to put their voices behind the Trafficking Victim Protection Act. 500 organizations, survivors, and advocates responded, and that allowed us to help move forward the Trafficking Victim Protection Reauthorization Act, which had $1.6 billion in federal funding for domestic and international initiatives to combat trafficking. We are continuing that effort with the Trafficking Survivor Equity Coalition. So if this is something that you would like to be a part of, please feel free. While I'm chatting, Alia will drop my email address into the chat. Please email me directly. We will get you added into that. We do have a meeting once a month just to discuss some of the upcoming policy initiatives and really where we're putting some of our focus.
The Safe House Project webinar series, I know, is actually where I know quite a few of you from, is that you've been a part of our attendees for this series. But if you haven't, know that this is a resource that's available to you. We created this webinar series with the intention to fill gaps in knowledge throughout the field by bringing together experts on topic related to underserved demographics, innovative solutions, and practices. And so the purpose of this was always to connect the industry nationally, because I know that we tend to get into a silo of what's going on in our community instead of what is going on outside in greater parts of the nation, and not understanding how those may be impacting what we're seeing in our communities. And so bringing all of that together. Some of those previous topics, I think we're at about 16 topics at this point. Some of them previously have been serving males who've experienced exploitation, demystifying DID, dissociative identity disorder, models of decriminalization, ethical survivor hiring practices. And this month, next week, we have one coming up discussing the brothels, what trafficking looks like in the brothels inside of Nevada. That's going to be really interesting. I've been learning a lot from these webinar series, and we've actually expanded them this year to also include monthly policy webinars as well. And I see everybody super interested in TSEC. I dropped Christy's email in there, but I can also gather these after the webinar. I'll gather all of your info, and because I can see the chat afterwards, and I will make sure to send you an invite, inviting you to TSEC. Those meetings are always very enlightening. Certification. So the grant and certification are my babies inside of Safe House Project. They are my two favorite things that we do outside of serving survivors directly through placement, which is influenced by certification and grants. But I love certification and grants because it gives me the ability to understand you all and what you're doing in the industry and how incredible your programs are, which in turn helps us to serve the survivors that come to us for placement better. Certification is a scaling model meant to help survivors and those placing them to find high quality programs, knowing that they've already received vetting, and for programs to be able to distinguish themselves from other programs that are not operating at best practices. So that is what certification is. It was always designed to ensure that homes for survivors are safe, secure, and supportive environments. We evaluate based on 4 main areas for certification. That's organizational structure and compliance, residential programs and services, governance and executive leadership, financial management. And if you have a specialized demographic that you serve, we will evaluate that as well. And then you can see the process for certification below. Our certification also includes a site visit, which helps us to understand a program more than just what can be conveyed during an application. And what we've found from the many programs that we've done this through already is that is really essential to being able to understand a program fully. And I do see that some people have their hands raised. Please feel free to drop questions in the chat. I will make sure that I have a little bit of time for question and answer at the end, but if you're dropping them in the chat, I might be able to weave them in as we go through the slides. I really have to make sure I get you all through all of these slides though. And I will make sure to send all of this information out to everyone afterwards so that you all don't have to worry about whether I saw your interest indicated. Last thing on certification, this is what our certification looks like at the end. So those programs that certify receive a bronze, silver, or gold badge based on how they scale as far as best practices, because that's what our certification is based on. A blue badge if they have a specific demographic that's underserved that they specialize in, trans survivors or those with severe mental health or those in need of interpretation services, things like that. And our green badge for programs that have been open less than a year. And these are just some of the programs that have completed certification or are currently in the process of going through certification. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit through some of the landscape of what we're seeing right now, because this is really what is going to influence what we're looking for on the grant and who we are going to be awarding this year. So Christy, I'll let you take this slide.
Yeah, so our hope and really the reason we are doing this webinar is because we want you to understand where the gaps are in the field. We want you to understand where the opportunities are. So many of you have stepped into this space with a heart to serve survivors, and that is incredible. And we have done so much together as a field, but we have more to do. And so what I want you to do is, hopefully we've got program directors on here. I know typically a lot of development directors get on. If you're a development director, I'm going to encourage you to take this back to the EDs, to the program directors, and have them really think about what their strategy is. And I'm not saying people need to change their strategy, but it might be that there are pieces of this data that make you go, okay, we've been seeing some needs in our community and we've been hesitant to respond because we don't know if there's really a bigger need for it. But we're going to inspect further and we're going to see about expanding our services. We want you to just have some of that self-evaluation. What are your core competencies? Who do you need to partner with to provide more successful outcomes to survivors? That might be that one of the things that we're looking to do here is address barriers to care. And so if you say, look, we recognize that there's a severe need, I will tell you guys, there's a sincere and severe need for programs to serve those with severe mental health. It might be that you are not equipped as a program, but part of what you apply for in this grant is to partner with a behavioral health facility who can provide or bring on an additional therapist who can provide specific modalities of therapy to support those with severe mental health, so that beds that you might already have that are open can be filled with those that are not receiving equitable access to care right now. Y'all know that for myself, for the Safe House Project team, most of us come at this from a place of faith. And so I will, whether that's where you come from or not, I will share this, that many of y'all remember when there's a story in the Bible when the children of Israel or the Israelites were escaping slavery. They had gotten all the way to the edge of the water. Pharaoh's army was chasing them, and they had to make a decision. The miracle didn't happen until, according to the Bible, they put their foot in the water, and that's when the waters parted. Sometimes the miracles don't happen until we step out of our comfort zone. And so I'm going to encourage you guys to just think hard on if there are any areas that you feel like you are being called to step out into that might be uncomfortable, that might call you to serve a different part of this population than you've historically served. But we really believe that there are incredible things that can happen when we step outside of our comfort zone. So with that, I will let Alia move forward on some of the data.
Okay, so with the data that's coming up, little disclaimer with that, we have collected all of it through our grant, through our certification applications, through surveys, through partner data. So things that are out there from Polaris, that are out there from NTSA, other organizations that collect data nationally, from industry studies, and from other open source information. As trafficking is an illegal industry, it's obviously, which I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir for many of you, difficult to gather statistics on. They can be very limited due to low rates of victim identification, lack of education regarding trafficking, decentralized data collection, legal barriers, etc. So it has its limitations. However, what we found is that when we looked at the larger number of data that was out there, the many organizations collecting data, we were able to aggregate that in a way that gave accurate description of the national landscape. And so we got this data from our own network, from Polaris, from State Task Force and coalition partners, Wellspring Living Institute programs, Institute for Sheltered Care, Thistle Farms Network, and NTSA. And what we found from pulling all of that data together, unfortunately, you can't see my graphic because there was a really wonderful map there. But what we found from pulling all of this together was that there were approximately 371 nonprofits providing direct services specifically for human trafficking survivors in the US. Of those, 286 provide residential housing, which, assuming there are about 6 beds, which we see as the average, that would come out to approximately 1,600 beds nationally. There were about 35 programs at the time we pulled this data that were in the process of launching, and there were 18 states that don't have a program specifically for minors. Please note, one of the questions we get a lot is, do we serve minors, or is this grant eligible for programs that serve only minors? Absolutely not. We also fund programs for adults as well, but there were only 18 states that didn't have a program for minors. Just so you know what we're looking for when we're asking questions about, are you opening or do you run an emergency program, a long-term program, or a transitional program, this is what we're looking for. So when we're describing an emergency program, we're saying something that's usually up to 90 days, really focuses on stabilization, acute trauma care, psychiatric assessments. Some have detox, but really focused on that immediate exit and stabilization. Long-term programs, we see these 12 to 18 months. We see them go up to 3 years, as I'm sure some of you do as well. And this is really for programs that are focused on long-term healing and a launching pad. So where there is a lot of therapy, there's a lot of life skills, a lot of trauma-informed care practices, where there's curriculum involved, and helping someone for more of a longer term, more on long-term healing and launching as opposed to stabilization. And then when we're discussing transitional programs or independent living programs, this is for those programs that we see as still incorporating some of the healing, but maybe it is more wraparound services and job placement, and for survivors that certainly are not in crisis and are really ready to be in the action steps of, are they going to school? Are they working? Those kinds of things. And that can look like independent living, or communal living. So from the data that we collected, this is what we saw the program breakdown in the US to currently be. As you can see, and as I'm sure most of you already know, the vast majority of programs serve women, which we know is a need, but we as a placement agency continue to see people who are not women looking for placement into homes. So we still have very limited program availability for trans men, trans women, and men in general. And that can be especially across the adult space for trans men and trans women, and for males of any kind in the minor and adult space. What else we found was that 76% of organizations serve young adults or adults. So very few programs for minors. There were only 25% of programs that served parenting survivors, and 29% of organizations that served CSEC survivors or survivors of CSEC, meaning that they serve minors. So sustainability is something that we have understood to be a serious problem in recent years. I think this is something that hit everyone at COVID, and people are still reeling to recover from. And many of you got a poll, and this is something that we really needed to understand in order to understand what gaps we were going to be filling this year. And through that and through other areas of data, other bodies of data that we aggregated, it was reported that 35.14% of programs were reporting problems with staffing, recruitment, and retention, and 56.76% were reporting problems with sustainability. And so we did do a webinar early last year around strategic sustainability, really talking about what we expected to see as far as difficulties that would be arising. And because the people that we had on there, not because we had this information, because it's certainly not my area of expertise, but the financial guys that we had on there really understood what was going to be happening. They gave great suggestions on how to future-proof your organization. So if you're an organization and that resonated with you, I encourage you to look at that webinar. It is on our website. And what we can see through this problems with sustainability that we're seeing was we saw a very small increase in the number of programs that opened between 2021 and 2022. So in 2021, there were 272 residential programs, or programs providing housing solutions is really what it is, not all traditional residential, but housing solutions, which is great. We need all the different models. And in 2022, we only saw 286. And it's easy to see how those problems with sustainability have led to a small increase, because we know that many programs closed in 2021 and only a few opened. So in the US, things to keep in mind as well is that there were only 14 states that we evaluated that had full continuums of care for adult females. There were 5 states with, my own typo there, 5 states with full continuum of care for minor females, and no states with full continuums of care for minor or adult males. 6 states still only had one housing solution, and 3 states had no housing solutions at all. So this is really the information that we're gathering in order to look at your grant applications so that we understand where the gaps are, because we are an organization that runs on find the gaps, fill the gaps. And so that is really what we're looking for to understand who we're going to be funding. So this is all influencing how we're evaluating your applications. So if we understand that there is approximately 1,716 beds, looking at the number of programs that are available, 286 homes with an average of 6 beds, and we're estimating based on the US State Department that there are 14,500 to 17,500 people trafficked in the US each year. When we run the math on that, that comes up to 88.2% of survivors that if everyone decided to exit would not have access to care. And this is especially true, and this would be in a situation where every single bed was empty. which we know would not be what was actually happening. Because if a survivor enters into a program and they stay in that program, they'll likely be there for 1 to 2 years. And so those beds are not all available at one time if we're doing our jobs or providing safe places that are fulfilling needs. But even if every single bed were to be open at the same time, there would still be 88.2% of survivors who would not have access to care. Barriers that we have seen. So as a placement agency that sees around, like Christy said, around 150 survivors every quarter, more than 500 survivors every year that are specifically looking for some kind of a housing solution. The survivors that reach out to us that we serve are not looking for wraparound care. They're in need of a housing solution. This is the barriers. These are most of the barriers that we are seeing as immediate need that we're finding difficulties placing in order. And one of the top needs that we're seeing is addiction level. So either they're not a program, or at least the open programs at the time, or the programs that have availability are not having the level of addiction services that survivor needed, especially in the area of detox. I know that this is not just a program or a safe house problem. This is a national problem that trying to find someone detox without good health insurance is almost impossible, but that is definitely reflected in the population of survivors that we get calls for. Programs that are able to serve those with severe mental health is another huge area, probably the second area that we are seeing a lack of services and beds for. Gender, we personally do get quite a few calls from trans and male survivors, and it has been historically very difficult for us to get them placement because of the small number of beds, usually always having other survivors in them. Minors as well, trying to find minors a program, especially minors in states where they do not have an in-state solution. And so trying to figure out those interstate compacts and finding programs that are willing to take those interstate compacts, whether it be a child welfare served youth, or a youth that is coming from a private placement, very difficult for us to find an option for them. Parenting survivors, another one that's very difficult for us to find options for, especially when it's coupled with maybe one of these other barriers. We're finding extreme difficulties in that. Physical disabilities, so mobility issues, deaf survivors, and overall health needs. We've had quite a few survivors that have cancer or other kinds of chronic illness, and it's been very difficult to find placement for them. Those that may need an interpreter. We have also had a lot of Spanish speaking survivors in the last year. That has been very difficult to find placement for, with programs that have interpretation services, as well as understand how to help them get a T visa for those that have been undocumented, which has probably been about half of the survivors that have needed translation services. And those for labor trafficking. We primarily serve sex trafficking survivors. We know most of you primarily serve sex trafficking survivors, but we do get calls for labor trafficking survivors who are in need of a housing solution, and it has been very difficult to find those for them as well. So know that these are definitely areas that we're looking at in grant applications to see if anyone has come with solutions to these, because in the end, what we're trying to fund is options for survivors. We're trying to make sure that every survivor has the ability to find a place of healing if that is what they're looking for. Disqualifiers. As a placement agency, we get to be really familiar with disqualifiers. And on the one hand, I'll tell you that it is so good to come across programs that know exactly who they serve and that are very clear on that, because the last thing we want is for a survivor to go into a program to have a higher level of need than that program is truly able to provide, and to not be able to be successful there and to leave of their own accord, get exited from that program, or have to be moved. We just don't see survivors find the most amount of healing in that way. And so we do appreciate people that have those strong understanding of what their disqualifiers are, but we need options for everyone. And on the left, you'll see where most of your referral sources have been coming from. Just really important to understand who you're getting your referrals from so that you can understand who they're most likely going to be referring and strengthen those relationships. If there's some on here that you haven't been utilizing and you're in need of referrals, please know that's a resource for you as well. And what some of those disqualifiers are there on the right. So disqualifiers for intake depend on where the program exists in the continuum of care. So we expect there to be less disqualifiers in an emergency program than there would be in a long-term or transitional program. But this sample here does reflect a really strong propensity to disqualify a survivor based on severe mental health or physical health challenges. And then of course, age and gender makes sense, as we know that most programs are situated to serve adult females. And then survivors had custody of a child, they had severe mental health, they had active addiction, and so on, as to what are those things right out the gate that survivors are being disqualified for. On the lines of mental health, because this is one of the areas that we see most often severe mental health and find very difficult to find placement for, maybe even after a period of stabilization, which is what we always really try to have happen, is that survivors with severe mental health disorders, including schizophrenia, DID, borderline personality, have limited access to programs due to the additional staff and resources that are needed to serve them. And as you can see, in 2022, on the left is the percent of programs that came to us looking to address any of these barriers. So we do see that you all are trying to be a part of the solution, and we love that. I know that in my conversations with most, if not many of you, you're seeing the same trends that we are and trying to figure out how do we do that. And then percentage of programs on the right, the percentage of programs that were already situated to serve these survivors. So acute mental health, something that it seems like as an industry we've gotten our handle on, a little less than 40%, still not very much, but more than in previous years. And we do see these numbers rising every year. So I know that's coming from all of your hard work in educating yourself, in hiring highly qualified staff, but we still have a long way to go. For those who aren't familiar with DID, it's something that our team actually sees quite a bit, and it is caused by severe, repeated, and prolonged physical, sexual, and emotional abuse in childhood. And usually what we're seeing is that this is from survivors who experienced familial trafficking very early on, and reports suggest that 40% of minors were trafficked by a family member. So something we know the industry is still starting to learn about, ourselves included. Okay. So I'm going to do my best to explain this beautiful, wonderful hypothetical that our gifted and talented CO, Brittany, put together for us. And she is the math brain. Christy and I certainly are not. So I'm going to do my best. So let's assume that there are 100 beds available in programs, 100 beds, making it a little easier for us to have this hypothetical situation. So there's 100 beds available in programs at every stage in the continuum of care for 100 identified survivors. If we follow the national data, 63% of identified survivors report severe mental health challenges. And we understand that can only be for a short time, right? I'm a survivor. I certainly would have qualified in that. And when I first exited, but I definitely would not qualify for that now. So we know that at this period, when they're identified, 63% of survivors report severe mental health challenges. So if they were entered into emergency program, 50% of emergency programs accept survivors with those severe mental health challenges. That would mean that 50 survivors with severe mental health entered an emergency program. 37 survivors without severe mental health would enter the program. 13 survivors would be denied care, and 80% of those 13 survivors, meaning 10 survivors, would end up re-victimized, and 13 beds would remain open because the remaining survivors had severe mental health. I hope you're tracking. if this was a long-term program. 24% of long-term residential programs accept survivors with severe mental health challenges. This would mean that 24 of the 50 survivors with severe mental health challenges who entered the emergency program, right, because they're moving along the continuum of care, would be able to transition to a long-term program. Not a lot. 37 survivors without mental health challenges would enter the long-term program, which is great. 26 additional survivors will leave an emergency program without a safe place to go and without safe housing. 80%, meaning 21 survivors, would end up being re-victimized or re-exploited. And 39% of the 100 beds are available in long-term restorative care homes. And so what we see from this, the outcome of all of that would be 61 survivors out of 100 would receive emergency and long-term residential care. 30 or 31 would end up being really exploited, and 39 beds in long-term restorative care homes would remain vacant despite there being capacity issues and people saying that they have beds to fill. So even with this data, even with this understanding, it doesn't take into effect comorbidity. It doesn't take into system breakdowns, regional barriers, legal requirements, and other individualized care needs. It assumes perfect distribution of available beds to the correct survivor. It assumes that none of these survivors have interpretation needs or have custody of a child, but that they would all be perfectly situated into entering any of these programs. So even in a perfect situation, we still have empty beds and we still have survivors that are not being served and end up re-exploited. There are opportunities for all of us to be a part of creating solutions so that this isn't the reality that we continue to live in. And some of those opportunities options, things that we might be looking for in the grant, or things that you might be already doing as a program that you can apply to it for our grant for, would be that you would be intentionally building the program to decrease barriers to care and increase equitable solutions. Some of the ways we've seen this done is low barrier safety focused programs versus healing focused programs. We need healing focused programs. This is not to say that we don't want and value and fund them, but we are still seeing a need for programs for those survivors that aren't ready to be in a full healing track, but are ready to work on safety and just avoid re-exploitation, which is a significant goal. For therapeutic emergency programs, those that are able to take survivors right off the street, that can also provide detox, that can perform psychiatric evaluations and really become individualized for that survivor. We're seeing a need for expansion of services within existing programs. So strong, qualified programs are trained and equipped to receive survivors who require specialized services by expanding who they are able to serve, and for innovative solutions as well. So we love to fund innovation. Some of the ways that we've done that is, and something that we funded last year was programs that were training up safe families to take care for survivors' children while they go through programs, through therapeutic foster programs for minor survivors, and independent, what we call stage 4 living solutions. We understand that transitional independent living solutions is not the only time that survivors need support, and that there is actually ongoing support after that needed. And when those include housing solutions, that's something we see a need for as well. Some of the good stuff. In the analysis of last year's grant, so this is only data coming from last year, we had 97 programs that applied to us for funding from 32 states, 11 of which were brand new programs. As you can see, bottom left, very similar to what we see as the national standard. 85% of those programs served female, 14% served all genders, and 1% served male. Of those programs that applied to us, 49% were long-term programs, 33% were transitional or independent living, and 18% were emergency. A little less than 40% were applying to us to increase capacity, either open a new program or expand an existing program, and a little less than 60 were applying to address a barrier, which last year was the first year we were funding decreasing barriers. So that was really exciting for us to see. We do always ask where a program got any programmatic training to decrease that learning curve. especially for those new programs. And the majority of you all and people who applied had received programmatic training, and you can see where there on the right, but 23.8%. So quarters still had not received any programmatic training. So potentially we're operating as an island when they launch their program. So on the right, you can see our grant recipients from last year and what we funded as far as that. And then I have two of our grant recipients from last year on here for us to just share a couple of things about what that partnership has looked like and how they've been able to use those funds to better serve survivors. So I'm gonna go ahead and move them both onto here. Rodney, we'd love if you could start, just tell us a little bit about what that has looked like for you and Rehope.
All right, thanks for having me on and for the opportunity to be blessed by Safe House Project. And we finished our certification process last year, and that was very helpful. But the grant specifically has helped us expand services in two ways. One is for women with children. It's been a little slower than we had hoped, but our public permitting process through the county where our adult campus is located just yesterday finally gave us our special use permit and our green light go ahead to build a tiny cottage village, which for us would be phase 3. And that tiny cottage village for adult women also was approved, which we knew would be a sticking point, was also approved to house women with children. So we're additionally looking for another location that would be just for women with children. We're working on that. So the grant has helped us pursue and will help us provide additional housing that will be especially for women with children, at least in part. And then the other expansion specialized service we were looking for help with, that the grant is helping us with, is adding the ability to help boys. I will tell you that we have the staff, we have the place, and the money helped with that for boys. But our biggest challenge is the identification of boys and the referrals and the protocols, and then the young men or the boys themselves being willing to enter into a restorative program. So we are increasingly learning about more boys that need help. You certainly confirmed a lot of that today. We know where physically some boys are being trafficked in our area, and some recent research from healthcare providers is showing us that they're interacting with more and more males. In one study we just recently read that when hospitals use their code system for what is this diagnosis or assessment, they were indicating that they were seeing in some healthcare systems as many as twice as many boys ticking off the indicators for trafficking than the minor girls that they were seeing. So we know there's a huge need there, and their ability to close this gap between the known need and the ability to find, identify, and then get them into services for boys is a big challenge. But women with children and boys is what we've tried to apply most of the grant toward, and we're working in both of those areas.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rodney.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Becky and Mackenzie.
Thank you for having us. Both of us are with Call to Freedom. I'm Becky Rasmussen.
And I'm Mackenzie Huska.
And I have Mackenzie here, actually executive director, but Mackenzie is a director of Marissa's House, which we received funding for. Just a little bit about Call to Freedom. We are an organization that has 26 staff that provide supportive services, wraparound continuum care from beginning to end. As long as a survivor wants to stay with our services, they can stay with Call to Freedom. And one of those important components of our services is Marissa's House, which came from funding from Safe House Project in order for us to hire a new staff, which has been hired. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But Marissa's House is a 12-unit brand new facility, opened April 1st of 2022. And we saw a need when we were working with Marissa's House prior to our new facility of really needing parents being reunified. And we've had the blessing since April 1st of 2022 to be a part of that process. And as we have worked with survivors, what we've seen is they need a little extra wraparound care when it comes to parenting. Most of them are not equipped to or have never really had good parenting role models in their life. And so Amanda came on staff about 6 weeks ago, and we hired through Safe House Projects dollars. And this really, that position, and I'll let Mackenzie talk a little bit about it, allows us to provide those supportive services to the moms and the children. We're doing moving on curriculum, Love and Logic. You want to share a little bit about?
Yeah, so she just really walks alongside those moms anywhere from getting enrolled to Medicaid or those Department of Social Services type benefits, getting enrolled in school, daycare, getting a routine going, helping look for a job that's available Monday through Friday daycare hours. And then Becky mentioned just that parenting curriculum, the moving on curriculum, which is similar to like a healthy relationships type of course. And so everywhere in between. And then sometimes it's just helping the mom get through the day. She's done a fantastic job so far and has a ton of experience in the field.
So what we realized is because of the need, we want to equip them so when they transition out that they are surrounded by community support through that mental health, also counselors as well, but also that they have that connection even after they leave the program. So we are a long-term program with 12 apartments and 6 1-bedrooms, 3 3-bedrooms, and 3 2-bedrooms. And within those apartments, actually within our 1-bedrooms, we now have 2 children as well. And so we're finding that the 1-bedrooms are also being filled with children. And you said, how many do we have right now? We're at capacity, right?
Yep, at capacity with a wait list. And all of them are local gals with their children. We've been wanting to take some out of state referrals, but we've been completely full with a wait list. Keep the referrals coming though.
And we appreciate your dollars. We wouldn't be at this capacity and these wraparound services without support like you guys. So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. And we really do believe in what you all are doing, what Rehope is doing, what each of our grantees are doing. And that's why we continue to fund. But I think what you guys just said supports what we were just saying. If they are full from just local survivors with this much availability, how much more need is there nationally for more programs like this as well? So thank you guys for stepping in and filling a need. And we're excited to see the things that continue to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get to it. What is this going to look like for this year? So this will give you an idea. Any program that is eligible does need to be a 501c3 in the US. Our focus this year is capacity building. So we are looking to fund newer expanding Safe House programs that are providing residential services to sex trafficking survivors. You have to be able to show that you are really adding capacity nationally, whether it's you are an emergency home and you're adding a long-term home. If you are a long-term home and you've got additional funding federally that's for out in town for independent living, and you need some additional support to provide wraparound services to those that might not be good fits for inside the home, but you're still serving them in an external outpatient almost capacity. Those are just a couple of ideas of things that we've seen in capacity building, but also decreasing barriers to care. This has been really important because, to Alia's point on some of the earlier data, what we have seen oftentimes is that there are fabulous programs that are really well equipped that have open beds. And they have open beds because of the barriers that they have had to put in place to care in order to just, and we have extreme respect for this, safeguard the residents that are currently there. But sometimes, again, you might be able to open those beds up to somebody who has severe mental health by hiring an additional therapist to support some of those expanded needs. And so we've seen people work to decrease barriers that way. Let me tell you what is not decreasing barriers to care, because we saw this a lot on grant applications last year. Somebody noted earlier that we had 97 applicants and 20 that were funded. There were a lot of people who, quite honestly, filled out the grant application and said the barrier that they were looking to decrease was their barrier to funding. We absolutely know that everybody applying to us is looking for funding, but that doesn't answer the question of what barrier to care are you looking to decrease. And if you can just help us understand what barrier you're looking to address. LOI is going to be available starting April 1st to April 30th. Grant cycle is going to open May 1st. So anybody who is reaching out with that LOI will be able to apply starting May 1st. Grant cycle closes July 15th. Our team internally evaluates these grants, and then we have an interview process as part of this. Something that's just a helpful bit of information for you. This is a grant that is very challenging to be done correctly by most development directors. That is not as a slight to that skill. We absolutely love development directors because they're keeping programs afloat. But the type of information we are asking is more programmatic. And so we've oftentimes seen that development directors will go through and they will check off that every single trauma-informed training has been taken, because we do ask questions about programming, about therapeutic modalities that are deployed. And so when every single box is checked and then we come back to the programs and they go, oh no, we don't have any of that, then that is not helping you get the right information out so that we can help evaluate you properly to see if you even get to that interview stage. So just take that under advisement. If a development director is filling it out, we really suggest that you do it in collaboration with a program director or an ED.
Did you talk about deadlines, Christy?
Yes, grant closes July 15th. We will be awarding programs on or announcing in November, and then funds are dispersed in December. So the state resource guides, I dropped the link for the state resource guides in the chat. You can find it on our website at safehouseproject.org/resources. This is something that you absolutely can use to substantiate your case for support. And so it might be that you can say there is absolutely no emergency program in our state per the state resource guide. And so we are looking to launch an emergency program because that is a deep need to address the continuum of care. So use those state resource guides. We absolutely want those to be something that's valuable for you for our grant as well as others.
And this was something I saw someone earlier in the chat ask, could we share them by state? This is a place where you can find that by state.
Yes. And there are individual pages being created now. You can still download the entire guide by state, but there are individual pages that are also going to be created that are going to be easier shareable links. So those should be ready shortly.
Yes.
A couple of additional pieces that I noticed some questions coming out. Our funding, we typically fund anywhere from 10 to 15,000. We do not have a limit on the number, or sorry, 10 to 50,000. We do not have a cap on the number of programs we will fund. We quite honestly push out as much money as we can every year. So last year it was over $500,000 through funding and mentorship that went out to programs. We do not only fund certified programs, but many of our programs that are receiving funding do have the ability to have an additional piece of their grant to apply towards certification if they would like. That is something that we deeply believe in. We know a lot of programs are looking for, and so we just try to make that a little bit easier.
Have to be a part of certification or have gone through or go through
Correct.
certification to apply for and receive a grant.
Especially for new programs, we do recognize that you really need to be open for about a year for certification to really, you can be a new program to go through it, and get the emerging leader badge. But if you were a new program looking to open doors, then that's not going to typically apply to you.
Suzanne, definition of residential, we understand your model, we would still consider that residential. We would consider that independent living solutions, which is something that we would fund. So Suzanne was asking about like individualized apartments, even if they're dispersed. If you are a program that operates a housing solution in which you are responsible for that housing solution, you can apply for us for funding. We do love to fund innovation. We understand that not every survivor is going to be well served living under one roof with 6 other survivors. So that is not going to be the best place for every person. And we want every person to have an opportunity to have their basic needs like housing met. So please apply to us if you have a different kind of solution, as long as there is a residential housing component.
Yes.
Yeah, please drop questions in right now. This is a time where we can answer questions. If you have to leave, you can leave, or I don't want to hold you hostage. You can also email me questions if you do have to leave. Email me, not Christy, at safehouseproject.org, ALIA@safehouseproject.org. I'm not going to be taking any individualized meetings, grant meetings, or grant calls, phone calls during this grant season, but I will answer every single question that you have via email. And if you have questions right now, I'm happy to answer them. Christy, do you have more to say while I'm reading some of the questions?
Yeah, I think, again, just some tidbits on filling out the application. If, again, we've already said, if you're a development director, really please do this in partnership with your program director or your ED, because it is going to help inform it better. Also, when we do ask the question at the top of the grant that says, basically, what problem are you looking to solve? We absolutely understand that all of us are in this to address trafficking. That's really not what that question is intended for. Again, I know so many of you have bits that you use when you're filling out grants because we just need to do things on wash, rinse, repeat. But the way that question really is intended to, what that is intended to draw out is, what are you looking to address specifically within the field that you would see as a gap? And it might be that gap is there is absolutely no program in my area or in my state, and it might be that we're looking to address this barrier to care. So that's where you could really make the argument to substantiate that case for support and what you're asking specifically for funding for.
Okay, awesome. And Michelle, we will definitely connect on that. Thanks for leaving that there. Ashley, if you have a solution as far as where the funding resources would go to address each one of those barriers, you can certainly apply for each one of those in one application, and just make sure you have a narrative for each piece so that we can really understand what your solution to each one of those problems is and how the funding would be used to address those solutions. But we would love to see your solutions for each of those problems.
Wonderful. Thank you all for joining us. I know there might be some additional questions that come through. Just email those to Alia. We are so grateful for each of you for all of the work that you do and the support that you provide to survivors. So have a great day, and we look forward to seeing those grant applications come through.
The application will go live May 1st. Just a reminder, May 1st, you'll all receive an email to it, but in order to receive that email, you have to fill out our LOI. So our LOI is linked on our website. It's linked in any of the emails that I sent you preparing for this, and it will also be in the email that you get wrapping this up. So thank you all for coming. So excited to get to learn more about your programs and hopefully partner with a lot of you as you work to provide more solutions so that more survivors can get services. So thank you for that.